session of the Planning Commission. Stephen, do you have an initial presentation for us on the first agenda item?
I don't have any presentation at all. I'll just introduce our consultants again. So we had the Northwest preliminary outreach, or the second phase of it, and that was online for 3 weeks, and we had the 2 public meetings plus the meeting with the stakeholders within the marketplace. And so the results of those surveys are back, and Clarion has had an opportunity to synthesize them and prepare this presentation for you guys to provide feedback on. So I'll turn it over to Darcy.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Darcy White with Clarion Associates. I'm here tonight with the whole crew. We've got Matt Prosser with Economic and Planning Systems, Sung Han with Clarion Associates, and Cheney Bostic with Studio Seed. So we're going to kind of tag team the discussion tonight. Stephen kind of gave you a quick rundown of what we've been up to, but I think just in terms of how we were hoping to work through the discussion tonight, we're going to give you. You've got the detailed report, which again is a lot of information, as we saw last fall. We have kind of boiled that down. We've got some charts we can kind of look at, talk about kind of some of the themes that we saw. And then we also have framed up some preliminary options, recommendations for discussion. And that's really where we want to spend the most time tonight. So we're going to walk through kind of the 3 primary areas. Some of these will be quicker than others, as you might expect. We've got the guiding principles, the marketplace discussion. Matt and Cheney are going to kind of take the lead on a lot of that, and then Original Town. And so we'll spend a little bit of time giving you a quick refresh, particularly on the market context. Since you didn't get a chance, I know some of you attended a couple of the community events that we had. Not everyone did, and so we wanted to have Matt give you guys a quick rundown of some of their preliminary findings, just so everybody had the same basis of information. And then we're going to circle back at the end. We think there's a lot of different ways we could go from here. Do we continue this path of keeping all of these items together? Do we kind of split off and kind of do some different things? So we want to kind of walk through those options at the end once we've had a chance to discuss. So Stephen talked about the different options. I think overall we were pleased. We still had strong participation. I think one of the things that was interesting to me, though, is we had a lot of new people participating. I want to say it was like 300 people? I'm looking for some. We had a pretty strong percentage of people who did not participate in the fall, which was interesting. So, kind of getting to a wider group. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. We'll kind of run through that and then jump into the marketplace. So.
Good evening. I'm Matt Prosser with Economic and Planning Systems. So, we wanted to provide the market context up front to kind of help illustrate the decision-making process that we were making in terms of developing scenarios for the marketplace. And some of you have seen this, but others may have not. So we just wanted to run through it quickly. So the objectives of what we were doing really is to understand, what's the health of the marketplace specifically, but the sub area. And what are the opportunities in the future for long-term in terms of uses, and how does the town work forward towards securing the health of the marketplace, and also perhaps building on it. So first we looked at national trends, and so there's really 3 main things that we've been finding. First is retail spending is really starting to bifurcate in that the market has really shifted to either convenience and low price oriented retail, Costco fitting well into that, or experience oriented or sort of local oriented kind of retail. And those play into the other 2 trends that we're seeing as well. And so in that low cost environment, the e-commerce is really a major driver of that. The growth of e-commerce has been over 20% annually for the last 10, 15 years, while years, while brick and mortar retail has only grown at 2 or 3%. And so it's still only about 10% of the market, but our total retail sales, but it's an ever growing component. And as a result, you'll see even brick and mortar retailers are reacting and changing the way that they provide their goods to be competitive there. You see King Soopers doing delivery services, Walmart doing delivery to try to compete with the Amazons of the world. So there's challenges there. And with the growth of the online retailer, we're also seeing, since the recession, a lot of retail contraction, and that's happening both in terms of the number of store chains, but also in the number of stores that chains have. So Sports Authority, example here, a chain just went out of business. But you're also seeing stores that are still somewhat healthy and strong, reducing the numbers of their stores, where traditionally they perhaps were trying to get deeper and deeper into smaller trade areas. They're now retreating back to sort of central locations and serving a larger trade area with one store. And that's leading to contraction and definitely an impact on future demand. The other major thing we're seeing is the growth of food and beverage in terms of its component of retail centers. And so where traditionally food was about 30% of a retail center, it's now over half a lot of times. And that plays into that sort of experience, locally oriented kind of trend. And so as we think about the future of the marketplace, it's sort of considering those issues. So when we look at the trade area for the marketplace, the communities that serve that more regional trade area, what we're seeing is there is growth. And we are seeing housing growth within Louisville, Lafayette, and even the town of Superior with the downtown project. But a lot of the substantial growth is really happening in Boulder, believe it or not, and Broomfield, but more towards I-25. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of the new retail development has really gravitated more towards those areas because the trade area along US 36 is not growing at the same rate and not creating the same opportunities as the growth in Boulder and especially the I-25 corridor are. And so this map illustrates the year built of major centers along the US 36 corridor and I-25. And as you can see, the blue dots being the more recent centers, more gravitating towards I-25. And so what we're seeing is those centers and those locations being more advantageous for retailers and eating into the trade area that Superior supplies. And so a constraint. And so as we've sort of seen some contraction in the retail, probably perhaps a little bit of overbuilding prior to the recession in the early 2000s, we have centers along the US 36 corridor that are contracting or losing anchors and having a hard time refilling those spaces. And so what we're seeing is those centers are looking towards other things to be anchors or traditional anchor. Instead of a large store, are there other uses that can anchor traffic and generate traffic and keep the existing retail still viable? And so Westminster Mall, pretty classic example of a really outdated center and a massive change in terms of what they're trying to do at that place. And as well as Flatiron Marketplace, there's a proposal for them to move forward with converting that into a mixed-use center because they're having difficulties and probably likely unable to refill those really large boxes that are in that center. And so we're seeing that not only on this quarter but also nationally in terms of retail owners looking towards other uses as a way to drive activity and revenue out of their centers. So when we look at the retail market conditions in Superior compared to the county and elsewhere, we're finding that vacancy rates are a little bit higher, but really that's driven by one major vacancy, that being the Sports Authority. And then rental rates sort of matching with the county and other communities. So Superior and the marketplace specifically are competitive in that market. Again, it's filling those larger spaces is really a challenge. And then when we look at specifically at the marketplace, we have about almost 10% of the center vacant, again 40,000 square feet in one box, which is a big vacancy. And then we have issues in terms of some chronic vacancies in smaller inline spaces. And a lot of that, I think, is somewhat a reflection of the market, but more just a reflection of the center, and that you have a humongous center that's spread out, and you have inline spaces, small retail spaces that aren't really anchored. They're pretty far away from Target. So if you park at Target, it's pretty far away to try to walk to another one of these centers. And so a lot of that co-location benefit that traditional inline strips have from large anchors, the design of the center really makes that challenging. And I think that it is a big driver of the vacancies, or at least some of the chronic vacancy. And so going forward, as we think about the future of the marketplace, are there ways to help generate more activity or reconfigure the space perhaps that will make it located in better spots, or higher performing or more attractive space? There we go. We also looked at the office market to see if there's some opportunity perhaps for office to be a use that could be introduced into the marketplace. And what we found is there's been pretty limited new office space added in the area aside from Boulder and the Interlochen Arista area. Vacancies are pretty low generally. However, we do have a higher rate in Superior. I think that's somewhat reflective of the new building that's going up next to the sports stable. And so that's a little bit of a higher rate there. There is an opportunity perhaps to attract tenants from Boulder wanting lower rents in larger spaces that they can't find in Boulder. But you are having to compete with Interlochen and existing office nodes. And any prospective tenant or user of office space is going to want an area that has activity and access to amenities. And so retail is a major amenity, but the more and more employers are looking for more sort of vibrant environments. And so I think in our mind, the success of the new office building over in downtown Superior, if they're able to capture high enough rents and fill the spaces, is a good indication of perhaps future demand for more office space near US 36 and potentially within the marketplace. But I think that's a really good bellwether in terms of the strength of the market, and so something to track.
Can I interrupt with just a question?
Sure.
So Interlochen, I mean, you don't have a vibrant, active, walkable community for most of those buildings. I mean, the mall area is kind of there, but Boulder does. That seems obvious.
Yeah.
That they're doing well, and there's rental units and condos going up around these. But why is Interlochen so attractive? Yeah, I'm just
I think
curious.
a lot of it is it's created a large enough agglomeration of office space, so it's sort of a known commodity, and it's built. And so when you're getting a user, kind of what I mean is when you get a user out of Boulder perhaps that wants more space, you have a unproven office market in Superior, a lack of actual space versus a ready built space that's probably vacant. And so that's sort of that competition, is that even if somebody were to go forward with the project, they have to deal with the fact that somebody could move into perhaps a space that's already existing.
And they're building new buildings in Interlochen too. So
Yeah.
there are some large spaces available there for companies that might want to come in and build a building,
Yeah.
which I guess we don't really have.
Right,
possibly
and
in
I
downtown, but
think
nothing.
if you could offer an environment that was more similar to Boulder, it could potentially be competitive within Interlochen because it's something they can offer, which is what you're mentioning. It's
Yeah.
just that challenge of getting over the existing space versus
Okay.
speculative development.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of opportunities, in terms of increasing retail demand for Superior, I think really the focus should be growing the employment and housing base in the town, and those are really the keys to continued health, and hoping the trade area continues to grow as well. We think there's opportunity for additional uses within the marketplace that can help increase activity at the center. Really, more people coming to the center for more reasons will help the retailers. We think multifamily residential is the most feasible use, and definitely in the nearer term, in terms of a use that could be within the demand of the market and potentially feasible from a development perspective. Office and hotel uses likely can be attracted, or potentially I should say attracted, mainly driven by the visibility and access to US 36. That's a major amenity, but those kind of uses are going to want a little more vibrancy in the center before we think they're likely to want to move into it, and so likely not the first use to move. And then I think reconfiguration of portions of the retail center can really start to create more attractive retail spaces and facilitate mixed use. And so a lot of what Cheney was looking at, and she'll go through now, is what are some potential conceptual steps we can take in terms of trying to introduce new things, new uses, whether they're private or even public uses. So with that, I'll turn it over to her. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Are there any other questions for Matt? Okay. All right, so we'll shift gears. So a lot of the work that Matt did really kind of helped set the stage for these next two pieces. So we came up with a set of guiding principles, and you all helped. We did some wordsmithing on these before the community meeting, so I haven't included all the detail tonight, but just as a reminder, we'd come up with 5 principles, trying to integrate a lot of those ideas that Matt talked about, as well as the feedback we've heard from the community. And so we asked the community to kind of give us feedback on how well these ideas really work in terms of an overall framework for a vision for Northwest Superior. And overall, you know, this is early in the survey, so people were still energetic. We had 520 total respondents to this question. You know, I think 66% said, you know, match very well or well with their vision for Northwest Superior. So I think this was kind of the, you know, our sense is we're on the right track here. There's some refinement to do, but you know, I think we feel like we've captured, at least in terms of the general direction, a lot of the issues. There are a lot of open-ended comments here, I think also partially because people were still fresh in the survey, so they kind of taper off towards the end. So a lot of these themes really show up in multiple areas, which is kind of something we saw last time. You know, Matt talked about the vacancies, the idea of community-oriented places. Cheney's going to talk more about that. That came up a lot in the marketplace comments. We still have some folks who just say, you know, we don't want to grow anymore, period. That's certainly one perspective we've heard. And a lot of different opinions about housing, and Cheney's also going to talk some more about that. And I think one of the areas where we want to circle back in terms of the guiding principles and some of our conversation tonight is just trying to maybe reframe the conversation on Original Town in terms of what that needs to be and what the community wants it to be. You know, I think that the term character is something people are struggling with, you know, and how can we reframe that through additional conversation potentially to try to, you know, get to a better place on that. Traffic, definitely a concern, and I think I'll take this opportunity to remind you guys that we do have some traffic modeling in our scope to work with the town's on-call consultant, LSC. So what we're intending to do based on the discussion tonight is kind of do some refinements on the marketplace, run that back through the model so that we can bring back some more detailed information on that. We didn't want to go to that level of detail for this first round of meetings, but just a reminder to folks that we will be doing that going forward. So in terms of our preliminary recommendations on the principles, as I said, you know, I think the sense is we're on the right track. So what we would like to do is take a pass, working with staff, try to refine principles 1 through 4 based on what we've heard. You know, we feel like we're pretty close there. And I think one of the things that jumped out at me in looking through the open-ended comments is, you know, I think there was a perception that somehow these were ordered in order of importance. So some people said, well, transit is, you know, leveraging our access to transit is not the -- priority here. And so either we drop the numbers or, you know, there's just a perception issue there that we need to address in terms of how these are presented. And as I said, we'd like to come back to the discussion of Principle 5. That really relates to our whole third section in terms of where we want to go there. Any questions, concerns about that recommendation for this particular section? Okay. All right. Now I'll turn it over to Cheney.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cheney Bostic. I'm an urban designer architect, and my specific task for this portion of the project was to look at Superior Marketplace specifically and how that development might grow over time to become more sustainable and respond to existing conditions and markets and demands that we're seeing nationwide and locally, as Matt mentioned. We developed 3 scenarios, and I will walk through those in just a second, and we'll kind of fly through. It's a lot to take in, and as we mentioned in the community meetings, one of the reasons for the online is to allow people to have more time and to really dig in and take their time on those. So hopefully that was a successful effort there. The big ideas in terms of all of the scenarios that we look at for the marketplace, you know, for the scenarios to be successful, we thought, you know, it needs to improve connectivity. Right now, it's kind of a one way in, one way out. We heard a lot of people say that they would like to have different options of maybe riding their bike or walking there, but right now, just the environment doesn't provide for that. You've also got the BRT station, and lots of communities are looking at access and development around those stations, thinking, you know, do we want a parking lot here, or could we actually look at some other uses that could leverage the almost 1,000 users that you have a day there when I asked RTD about the ridership. Improve long-term success. So being responsible about our considerations, you know, the big boxes do provide a lot of income in terms of retail sales for tax sales for the community. So keeping the big boxes alive and thriving is important. Concentrating and relocating the underperforming pad sites, so the smaller sites like Matt talked about, and then adding those complementary uses such as perhaps office or housing, and more experiential retail such as restaurants. Improve the experience, so placemaking, again, this is a large trend that we're seeing in these large retail centers. You know, they lacked a place, and so lots of developments are looking at how can we kind of transform and create a special place for people. And then improve the identity. So one aha moment that we had in looking at the center is that it's very big, and although people recognize it as the superior marketplace, you really experience it in different ways. You know, you've got the Target and the Costco experience, and then the old Sports Authority kind of Whole Foods, and then there's just that middle that lacks place. So to run through these really quick, we did a 3D model. So here's existing conditions. Scenario A we called Center Drive. It's actually the name of that Center Drive there. So Marshall Road coming on, you can see Whole Foods down here. So right by the transit station. Working with RTD to create a partnership there, replacing the existing RTD parking, and then popping up a mixed-use building there right at the transit station to say, you know, this is a place you've arrived. And then all of these look at phasing. We want to be realistic. You know, you're not just going to plop down 5 new, you know, mixed-use structures. We realize that. And so keep in mind also that any proposal could also stop at any of these phases. So, you know, phase 1 might be just enough. Phase 2 then shows a parking structure that the RTD parking could go into, and then it could also serve these mixed-use buildings. We have a community use down also by the transit center that a lot of the community members really liked, a library or community center or something there. And then a final phase just showing more added connectivity. And one test that we did here was homes fronting onto the park. So up there in the left by the pink box, you see new townhouses come in. And so instead of having retail that really turns its back to the park, having more eyes on the park and creating a residential row there. So those are some ideas we explored. All of these in the right hand side shows the existing Ethan Allen under construction. Again, back to today. So then scenario B, we called this Marketplace Square. So this one really looks at, thank you, This one really looks at creating a place right away, having a town square or green there that could be activated with retail and restaurants right on Marshall Road, so visibility is key. And then so first development starts a little bit away from the RTD station, but within walking distance. Go ahead and build that parking structure first to replace the RTD parking, and then that opens up all of RTD land that you can create an access street that terminates at the BRT station and leads into the town green, Marketplace Green, let's call it. And then a final phase that kind of looks at additional development coming on in. The big transportation change in this one is that we've rerouted Marshall Road, and this is kind of working. Oh, let's try that one. Okay, so Marshall Road, instead of coming up and through, what we looked at here was taking it over closer to these big boxes. So really bringing Marshall Road over with another roundabout and then serving so that could serve the big boxes and operate as the larger street does today, but move it closer and then creating more of a pedestrian-oriented grid. Okay, and then scenario C is called connections and node, and really what we were thinking here is let's create some options that are less intense in terms of new development coming in, but also feasible, trying to create a place around the transit station with a new mixed-use development, replacing the parking, but really just then making the connections into the center, making more multimodal connections to the center, and perhaps, infilling here and there with some new buildings. This option does not replace any existing buildings as well. So this is all working on vacant land or parking lots. So those were the three options, scenarios that we looked at and asked the community about with feedback. This series here just runs through a plan view. It helps me to understand. So existing conditions here, you've got, Marshall Road coming through. Center Drive really expands the grid. So one thing that I didn't mention in going through this is the transportation impacts. And what we would do with a scenario like this is really encourage the town to create more of a street grid. So a lot of those, like Fifth Avenue here, it accesses the parking. Really, that's kind of what it acts as, is just an access drive to the parking. But if you could create more of a multimodal street and have a public right-of-way there, and some of these Center Drive and others coming in, you can really, we think, distribute traffic better and lessen the impact on Marshall Road. So Marketplace Square, this had more impact, and that was one of the negative comments that we got from the feedback, that people were, maybe liked this scenario and the interesting grid that it created, but were worried about the impacts of creating that much construction in the center, which is a valid thing to be concerned about. As we said, we really want to maintain the viability of these big boxes. So that would be a lot of construction. And then connections and node really keeps Marshall Road operating as it is today, but then adds some of those other connections in a more street-like environment. So just an overall comparison, we did do some preliminary numbers for these. So added housing capacity, Center Drive, anywhere from 300 to 400 added units. Marketplace Square had a little bit more density with 400 to 500, and scenario C was the lowest with 200 to 300, 250 to 300 units. And then we have the commercial capacity here. We also took into account, this isn't we looked at replacement retail as well. So if a building went away in one of these concepts, the idea would be that we would find a home for them in a new building and replace that. So, general cost, as I said, Marketplace Square with the reconfiguration of the street grid is probably a little more expensive than the others. So we asked the community in each of these which of the scenarios is most consistent with your vision, and it was quite mixed. Although scenario A, and this was true in the community meetings as well, tended to be more popular. And then, how well do you think these scenarios address your concerns or ideas? Most were in the middle, with well being next. So, key considerations and questions for you all tonight that we want to have you think about is that the fact that the TIF is expiring soon. So any of these suggested improvements, although they might be exciting to think about, we need to think about how those would be funded and paid for. Keeping in mind, as Matt talked about, that retail trends are changing. So the big question that we asked ourselves when starting this process is, what happens if we do nothing? And that's the scary question. So it's good that you're thinking ahead and knowing that retail trends are changing. It's less about sales, more about the experience. How can we create an experience here? And then also take into consideration the relationship with downtown Superior and know that, that's happening and going on, and how can we, be progressive and responsible. Seize the opportunity around BRT. As I said, many communities are looking at these parking lots and saying, is this really what we want here? If you want to explore opportunities there, we need to work with RTD. We need to look at the zoning and have zoning to support that. What role should housing play? So this is a big question. As Darcy said, there was mixed reviews on the housing. Nationwide, in terms of creating transit-oriented development, it's a really important ingredient because it activates it on a 24/7 basis. There's always people around using those services and activating the public spaces. So, but it also comes with a parking demand, and so how are we going to put that in and pay for that as well? And what level of investment and intervention is supportable? So thinking about both quick wins and then long-term progress in the center is a big question. Let's see. So potential implementation strategies, things that we might think about recommending, and we're still working on these, and we want to kind of vet that with you all tonight. Might be to amend the PUD or to rezone. There are only 2 pad sites left with limited commercial available in the existing PUD. Housing is not allowed right now. And then you might want to think about design guidelines for the architecture and public realm of any new buildings that come in. A signage plan. So again, going back to those neighborhoods and nodes and really creating an identity out of the center. One thing that we would recommend is to look at a signage plan that has better wayfinding and directs people better to Target, Costco versus Whole Foods versus Center Drive, and maybe rebrand the center and give it a new life. Acquiring rights of way. So as I understand it, 5th Avenue and Center Drive are currently private streets. And so if you want to look at expanding the grid and doing some of those recommendations that we think might disperse traffic and lessen the load on Marshall Road, we might want to look at making those public streets. And then possibly acquiring vacant sites or underutilized buildings to so that the town has that ownership and that authority to develop. And then marketing the center to developers working with RTD. So next steps that we are proposing is that due to the mixed reviews and the feedback that we got on the scenarios, we would like to take another stab at creating a sort of merging some of the concepts and developing a preliminary preferred scenario. And really the big ideas would be to create a central gathering place. We heard that over and over again. People really like that park in the second option, and that doesn't exist in scenario A, so maybe blending those two. Enhanced signage and branding, improve connectivity all day. Those things were well received. And then refining that overall mix of uses, talking to you all about, housing and how much should we show and think about, and then one of our big recommendations is really to start around the transit center. Start there and kind of work out. And then explore and model 2 circulation and access alternatives. So I'm going to hand out a little diagram sketch that I did. Were we able to get that?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. So on my way here, I drove this route that is one of our recommendations of it's kind of a blend of rerouting. You're welcome. Rerouting Marshall Road. There we go. Okay, so here's your existing, and we're looking sideways, so north is this direction. So right now, Marshall Road comes on in and zooms out. We heard there's a lot of cut-through traffic on that, and also it carries a lot of traffic because it's the one way into the center. So a big concept that we would like to explore is, and this isn't completely disruptive in the fact that we would still keep the existing grid. So right now, I'm going to go over to the proposed area. So right now, Marshall Road does this. And if we moved it over to 5th Avenue, expanded that, kept perhaps keeping the roundabouts and doing a 2-way roundabout, so directional traffic could either turn or go straight. That new route would serve the big boxes better. They would get more visibility. It would not eliminate, but maybe cut through traffic. And it also opens up the opportunity of our center drive to really serve those smaller uses and give the experience that we're talking about, more of a main street. So you can imagine, little plazas and outdoor seating and gathering areas along that center drive, but allowing that larger street to really do what it needs to do and serve those big boxes. So that's the big idea that we would like to explore further with some traffic modeling.
Jamie, you want to talk about those other pinch trees that you mentioned?
Oh, yes. And then the other thing is, and I've highlighted it because yours is in black and white. So the highlighted areas are three areas where we think we can expand opportunity for traffic to come into the marketplace. And that is right after the old Sports Authority box, creating a right in, right out. So keep the median there. It's very easy. Just, you create an additional access. So alleviating some of that traffic. And then another one between the PetSmart and the bank. And then aligned with Center Drive, if you go all the way through past Target, there is a spot in between 2 buildings there that has a sidewalk. That could also become, again, a multimodal access point. So let me go back to, explore and model 2 circulation and access alternatives, create a blended alternative of a preferred scenario, and then bring that back to you all. So those are our recommendations for the marketplace. And I think that's all.
Go ahead.
Couple questions. First of all, I like this a lot. I think it does bring in a lot of the things we heard, and I'm supportive of continuing studying that. Particularly, I think we heard at the business representative meeting that right in and right out. I think it would really aid in getting those retailers better access. That Panera entrance is just really, not ideal. So I think that's really great. I'd be curious to see on the one that's popping through Michael's, how the truck loading would work. Kind of that's the service entrance too, or if that would be a vehicular connection, or if you guys would actually think about bringing a full street section through there, how that interplay with the freight back there. Just something to think about. And then my question, I guess, also is for Matt. In your opinion, from the market study perspective, are any of these scenarios either one enough to, I think, carry the marketplace kind of into this, next 20 or 30 years? Or what are your thoughts from a market perspective related to viability on these scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we were trying to do is just explore ways to introduce new uses. I mean, I think things, generally in our mind, something that's going to drive more people to come to the center for more reasons and in a different way, perhaps, than they are just driving straight to a store and shopping, we think could have a lot of benefits. I think starting at the transit station area is probably the least impactful in terms of operations, and so that makes a lot of sense. We think it's really interesting, perhaps, to think about how things might function with Marshall being kind of reconfigured and perhaps providing direct access to the big boxes. But at the same time, that in sort of the interim for the center drive retailers and the stuff that's past where that new access would be challenging from them from a retail perspective, because they would lose traffic in front of their spaces. And so really that kind of change would be with the thought of trying to really free up a lot more room for redevelopments and more intense uses, and really pushing that concept of almost having two centers. You have a center around Whole Foods and you have a center around Target and Costco, and that's sort of how it's functioning now. The other scenarios are trying to be less impactful in terms of at least current access. I think also want to ask the modelers in terms of what we could do, what impacts kind of slowing traffic along Marshall might have from their perspective, and perhaps slowing traffic down through there could create some more, it would make those center drive retailers and ones along Marshall there a little more attractive because people aren't buzzing by them as quickly. So I mean, I think that scenario slide really, or that comparison slide that had all three, sort of illustrates it. I think A and C are really more minor impacts, but create the opportunity to introduce new uses, where B is really the big move and really creates the opportunity to really create an actual center there. But it's a risk. It's a big, bold move, and I think whoever the property owner is would have to be sort of fully on board on that concept. But I think we wanted to look at it from as many angles as we could, just to see if it was viable or not. And if traffic comes back and says it's going to have big issues, perhaps we lose it. And so it's such a big move in our mind that if we're finding reasons why it doesn't make sense, let's not keep it on the table and just focus on more pragmatic changes.
Great, thank you.
A couple questions, and just thinking about at least what I think are successful centers. Shops at Walnut Creek, the other one's the Orchard Town Center, like 144th and I-25. Why are they so successful? I mean, every time we've gone over there, it's usually, and they do have an activity center. I mean, our kids play at the amphitheater that's there, but that's not what's drawing everybody to that area. That brings people into that center, but there's an awful lot of shops. And is that because of just the volume of homes around the area? I mean, I'm just curious what's making those two centers so successful, or am I correct that they are successful? I mean, this is my observations from a fair number of visits, but.
So I'm more familiar with the second one you mentioned, and I would say that it goes back to placemaking. Orchard Town Center has a main street, so it really functions and operates, even though it really is a retail center. You feel like you're in a downtown. And it also has a lot of outdoor seating and also options for, it's very family friendly. There are things for kids to do, and then you go out to dinner as a family. So I think it has a better mix of uses there, and there's a place. There's something that makes it feel a little bit more special.
It also has had housing from the beginning. I mean, the multifamily right next to the Main Street came online within a year of their
That's true,
redevelopment,
yeah.
so it's pretty well established.
And office as well, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you look at both of those nodes, so the orchards, I think you have a trade area that's larger because you're on Interstate 25. So the draw is bigger there, and it's growing. It's growing quicker than this trade area. I mean, I think one of the issues with US 36 corridor is that it has a lot of constraints. There's a lot of open space that's not going to develop. That sort of growth potential is sort of limited. And you don't have that same sort of interstate connection that I-25 does. And then if you look at the mixture of uses in those areas, I mean, the orchards, you have the residential, as I mentioned, you have a large fitness center, you have a variety of things going on in that center, and so it drives traffic at more of a variety of times. I think the shops at Walnut Creek are more of an analog, perhaps, to the Superior Marketplace, and I think if you look at that intersection, there's, on the other side of 36, you have a major entertainment center. On the other side of Church Ranch, you have a growing collection of hotels. So there's a variety of things going on there, and they've been able to build a mixture of uses in that collective sort of interchange that I think creates more vibrancy. And then also I think that center is better designed than the Marketplace is. It's still kind of quirky too. The access is kind of weird. It almost functions like Target's a little bit different than the other area, but it's more condensed than the Marketplace is. And that inline functions better because of that, in my mind. So yeah, that would be sort of one other point in terms of the Walnut Creek shops at Walnut Creek. I think that the trade area is likely more dense. You're closer to Denver Metro, or the center of Denver Metro, and so there's probably more households in that too, and so that helps as well.
The other case study that actually one of the stakeholders that we met with brought up is the Village at the Peaks in Longmont, the old Peaks, Twin Peaks Mall redevelopment. And she said, we have the same retail place there, and I forget, what the numbers were, but it was, 3 times more success. They did 3 times more business than the one they have at the Marketplace, because they front onto a small village green where they always have activities, and there's kids playing cornhole and things going on, and they program it. And so she thought that was a good case study to look at. And
so in terms of, and so what I'm hearing, I mean, you need more people, which comes from housing and office. Can we at some point get numbers about what that looks like? So what is it about Orchard Creek? How many homes are around there that are supporting a development that's successful? Because we might not want to go there, right? I mean, one thing that might become really clear is we don't want 4,000 more homes, here in order to create something that's is that successful, or we might. I don't know what people will be thinking, but and same thing. Or probably it may be the Village, the Peaks in Longmont and Walnut Creek are 2 better solutions. I agree. The Orchard at Town Center, the I-25 corridor, sure, that's going to help. That probably helps a lot in the intense growth. But I would be curious what the demographic is around these areas, how many homes there are that are supporting this, how many offices, how much office space is around. Is that something we could maybe get at some point? Okay.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. And I think I just, to add some more points to it, I mean, I think generally, in terms of the Marketplace, I'm not necessarily saying we don't think long-term the center is viable. I think it's just the more you can do to support it continually, and that there aren't a lot of large users or large retailers that are going to come into the market here, because like I said, it's somewhat constrained, and so it's working with what you have. And I think sort of what we tried to illustrate in a lot of these scenarios was not so much adding a lot of retail space, even if they're in mixed-use building, but really kind of replacing in a lot of ways and better configured space, with the thought that perhaps the center is functioning well enough, and if we better configure space, the sales and the attractiveness of those spaces could go up. And so it's not necessarily a message that you exponentially have to grow for the center to remain long term. It's more that the introduction of more uses will create more vibrancy, which will make the spaces more attractive, perhaps. And so we can talk about how those trade areas are different, but I don't necessarily want to portray that you need to grow substantially more to maintain the long-term vibrancy. If you're wanting to grow the amount of retail at the center, perhaps that's the argument. I also think that you have a really substantial project going on in downtown, and
Right.
the benefits from that you won't be able to see for the next couple of years. But once all that activity gets going, you know, the hope would be there'd be a bump in sales, and there's a lot more people living over there and going to the stable and all of that, and hopefully that's benefiting the marketplace as well.
And that really is the question. I mean, it's, you know, if it's 10,000 homes within, you know, X number of miles for a center that can support X amount of retail, I'm just curious what the thoughts are about what it takes, and is there enough around this area?
Yeah.
And, you know, how much do we need to create what we want in that area, right? So just like you said, if we want to keep it a small activity area, we need to add 800 more homes in here, and along with the 1,200 housing units going in across the way, and that, you know, we think, at least today, the way things are, that would be a target, a good target for us, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that number happens to be.
Yeah, we can look at that for sure.
Okay.
So I think one of the things that Marketplace has compared to the other examples is Marshall Road. None of the other examples have a major thoroughfare going right through the middle, whether it's going to be offset or remains where it is. It's a big obstacle versus what those other examples are. They don't have any major thoroughfares going right through the middle of them. And I know in Longmont, you're talking about the open space, that open space isn't much bigger, or the, you know, where they schedule or plan everything and their events and everything isn't much bigger than maybe twice the size of this room. It's a very condensed, it's tiny.
Yeah.
So it's not anything that it's special about that.
Right.
But if it's successful, maybe it's because it's new. I don't know, but and the same thing with the Orchard. I mean, it's fairly new and, you know, attractive for a lot of people, so they're going to go and check it out for a while, and maybe. So I don't know if they're really successful until you look at them 5 years down the road, right?
Fair. Yep.
Yeah, and sort of an interesting point to build on that. I mean, if you think about users of an inline space, both from sort of a service perspective and a retail perspective, new growth in the area, to them, no matter the amount of it, is new opportunity. And so if a dentist, for example, is looking to move into a new space, but it comes into a retail center and a trade area that nothing's really changing, in their mind, they're like, well, where am I going to get my new patients from? Whereas if they do see activity, to them, that's more of an indication of, oh, there's new people moving in, so I'm not competing against the existing patterns of people. And so it's sort of a psychological thing as well, and that's not necessarily a numbers game. It's more of just sort of a perception thing in terms of tenants that are looking at spaces as well.
And it seems like we'd want people using Marshall Road, right? I mean, that's to go to Boulder, because that's just going to put more people through that area too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like the comment about Marshall being different from those case studies. The other thing that the marketplace has that those don't is a transit center, an existing
Right.
operating transit center. So,
Yeah.
any other questions for the marketplace?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so shifting gears into Original Town, we similarly set up a series of scenarios. Obviously, this is a pretty different set of questions that we're talking about here, but the basic premise we've been talking about with the community is trying to look at what the future growth potential is of this area, the understanding that you have a lot of regional pressure happening around you. There's growing interest in a lot of these older neighborhoods because of lot size, because of access to services. They're pretty desirable. And so I think trying to get a handle on what the potential could be in this area, not to say that anyone is directly encouraging that, but just sort of trying to build an awareness of what the potential options might be under your current zoning. And we looked at, kind of ran the numbers on the existing zoning. Estimate was about potential for about 100 new units under your current zoning, and that includes a Second Avenue property, as well as an assumption that you're going to see some infill and redevelopment, within Original Town in those areas. And so, to put that into context, I think we are looking at about 350 total residents right now, or units, I should say, in Northwest Superior as a whole. So it's a reasonable change when you start to combine that with change in the marketplace and looking at that area as a whole. But we really wanted to kind of put that out there for context. So we walked the community through a whole series of examples, which I won't do tonight, in terms of just, what might we see under our current regulations in terms of how might a new infill single-family home be built, what could happen. One of the comparisons we used was the new single-family homes on the edge of original town. We heard a lot of comments about those, so we kind of use that for context in terms of scale. This is what's possible under your current zoning. Sung actually determined you could go a little bit larger under current zoning. Those actually don't max out your current zoning completely in that area. So we looked at several different options for both I forgot I actually do have a couple of these in here, so let me talk you through these real quick. So I think a lot of the things that we heard from the community last fall in the initial outreach is trying to explore what types of things they might be concerned about as they think about if you saw significant changes on your block, in your neighborhood, what would you be concerned about? So we looked at both site design and building massing and form. We did not focus on style, architecture, character, those types of things. We're really thinking about just the relationship between new development and the existing development. So we kind of framed it up that way in terms of two types of issues. We looked at, this was kind of one of the consolidated options that Sung put together, looking at existing context. So this is just to kind of give you a sense, was, assuming that, let's see which one of these was working. This guy. So this would be, for example, 2nd Avenue property. You've got a pretty large vacant property adjacent to original town. You could see some significant changes in that area. You could have a row of front-loaded garages. Just what are some of the potential scenarios that we might see? And so looking at under that current zoning, this might be one option in terms of what that kind of plays out as. So the other factor that we highlighted was in terms of the 2nd Avenue property and the fact that that could go through the PD process, it could go through your current zoning. So there are different factors there to consider. So we talked about A as our no change option. So basically, let's keep the tools that we have. And then we talked about 3 different potential change options. One would be to look at some design guidelines. So these would be advisory. And while this is a very flexible option, we talked about some of the challenges with that. It's pretty tricky to administer, particularly for a small town with limited staff. So it can be challenging for both staff as well as the applicants. We've found that in many cases when communities have guidelines, they often come back some years later and want to turn those into standards and maybe boil it down. So something to think about, but certainly an option. So you've got some new tools, but it would be less predictable. And then we looked at design standards or an overlay district for this particular area and what might that mean. So this would be a regulatory option, so kind of a shall versus should. And talked about some of the potential tools that you might use. If scale is the issue, do you want to explore a bulk plane? Do you want to look at a percentage of lot coverage increase above what you have versus, kind of the base requirement, which is 40% currently. Most of the existing development in that area is about 20%. So one of the things that we explored. And then we also talked about working incentives into the mix. I think people really like the idea of, some give and take here in terms of thinking about, how do we incentivize some of the things that we might like to see or not like to see in this particular area. So for example, you could reduce the overall lot coverage, but allow people to earn that back through doing a lower, a 1.5 story building instead of a 2-story building, or reducing the height. There's a lot of different ways that we could look at that, but I think the goal there would be to provide as much flexibility as you could to try to achieve some of those desired outcomes. So we also talked about you know, kind of what would these apply to? I think they're wanting to make sure that people understood that, you know, if they're not making changes to their existing property, you know, this isn't something that would really kick in until you were making significant changes. We often come up with a you know, percentage change in terms of, you know, we consider it a major project if it's over 50%, you know, of your existing footprint, or you're investing a certain percentage. There's a lot of different ways to kind of categorize that, but there would be some thresholds that would trigger the new standards or guidelines if you chose to go that way, major addition, or if you did a demolition or replacement of an existing building. So we asked folks to give us feedback on kind of which of these scenarios they thought the town should consider pursuing to guide future development in original town and vicinity. So again, kind of Second Avenue property, the other RM areas in original town, of which there's several. So we had 225 total respondents. In this particular set of slides, some went back. We didn't include this in the summary just because it would have been way too long, but we did want to break out for your context the original town responses from the community as a whole. You guys had some questions about that in our early analysis. So looking at our total respondents here, as I said earlier, you know, the overall number, people had the ability to either respond to original town or not. So we had 225, 64% supported a scenario that involved action of some sort. So basically B through D, you know, some interest in those opportunities. 20% preferred no action. We had 31 original town residents respond to this, and 48% were interested in pursuing one of those scenarios. 52% preferred no action. So we're more mixed, certainly when you start to dial it in. And that's one of the things we want to talk more about. In terms of the types of strategies, when we talked about site design, you know, I think there was definitely interest in the options that were presented. When you look at original town residents specifically, stronger preference for no action. But again, it's a much smaller percentage, a smaller number in terms of that. I think the variable between the 4 questions or so that we asked for original town, we had anywhere from, you know, 31 to 45 residents that responded to those different questions. Building design, you know, I think this is one where we had more support, interest in a lot of different strategies, similar response on original town, less interest in that particular direction. Key themes from the open-ended responses, I think, you know, these were pretty broad. If you had a chance to read through those, a lot of different, you know, likes or dislikes in terms of you know, what might that look like. Some people had very specific ideas. Some people were interested in only having single-family homes. Your current zoning already allows for other types of uses, so that's not really something we can pursue. So we asked a separate question about new or greenfield development, and this was an important distinction because we really wanted to be able to talk about, you know, that site-by-site incremental change that you're likely to see versus a pretty large new project coming in, whether it's Second Avenue property or one of the smaller but still pretty significant RM properties in original town, and really think about what that might mean. So if you go back to that no action option, I pointed out the kind of row of homes. You know, if you start thinking about it from that scenario, do you have different ideas about what might be an appropriate strategy to consider? And so this one, you know, I think overall people were expressed support for a variety of strategies. I think there was a lot of interest in this particular issue. But again, the same response in terms of original town residents indicating a stronger preference for no change. So we also asked some more nuanced questions about some of the specific issues for original town based on the kind of what we'd been hearing. One of the big questions we had in trying to get at the issue of, you know, is it character, is it scale, you know, what are the things that people really are concerned about? We asked whether the town should take steps to incentivize the protection of existing building stock. So is this really about trying to make sure that my neighbor doesn't tear down their house and build something really large that overshadows my home? Or is it the idea that we really want to preserve in some way and encourage people to retain those existing homes and maybe add on to them or improve them versus build new? And so that was an important question. And so the responses on that, I think a larger percentage said yes. And in that case, original town as well, again, small percentage. And that could mean, simply that you have some incentives built into your standards or guidelines that really are geared towards that particular question. In terms of the lot splitting provision, this is something that your code allows for currently. If you have a really large lot in original town, you have the ability to go through and replat that based on the original plat. And so you could have, one large lot now that had been combined when the home was originally built, tear it down, build 3 new ones. So that was one of the scenarios that we explored. People are in support of keeping that. There's some interest in looking at maybe a stronger review process for that. Right now you can do that by right, and there's not a lot of those. I think we have all the breakdown of all the lot sizes, et cetera, but part of it was wanting people to be aware that that's a possibility. And then the last question that we asked related to accessory dwelling units. And so we had some responses. I saw, what the heck's an ADU? And, we often get that question. So this is, it can be it can be called a granny flat or a mother-in-law suite. This may be a unit above a garage. Sometimes they're adjacent to a garage. There's a lot of different ways that can happen. But it's basically, a smaller dwelling that kind of works in tandem with the primary dwelling. And so this is something that Louisville has seen a lot of. They've really been proactive in, establishing regulations. There's a lot of them that have been constructed. And so that's one example close to home of kind of how that's played out. And I think this is something we came up in the conversations last fall in the context of wanting to make sure that, there continued to be options for different housing choices in the community. So that we weren't moving in a direction where folks who worked in the marketplace, weren't able to afford to live here. And so that's really the context for that conversation. So in terms of interest of this, it's mixed. I think a lot of people were not sure. Some people said yes in both RM and RL. And we had some folks who were thinking maybe on a more limited basis. So that's one that probably needs some more teasing out as well. So in terms of the ADUs, I think it's worth noting some of the comments were really thinking about, maybe I'm not so concerned about the space itself, but how is it going to be used? Is it going to be a rental? How does that impact traffic and our neighborhood generally? Other folks thought it was a nice, viable way to expand affordable housing options, particularly for older residents. So some definite things to consider there. So in terms of our thinking on Original Town, we've got some options here. I think, as we walked through the responses, as I kind of noted, pretty different angle you could take in terms of those responses. And so one of the things that we, noticed is that, support for looking at some potential tools for new or greenfield development were stronger than they were for Original Town. So one option might be to, pursue that as something that is going to have a larger impact on the community as a whole, and that might be a step you could take. So that's one thing you could think about. Looking at additional tools for both RM and RL. I think depending on how you look at that, and that's where we really need direction from you guys, you could move forward with some actual potential tools for people to respond to. I think we've tested the idea of trying to get at this conceptually, and I think if we're going to continue the conversation, we're going to need to put some more tangible ideas in front of people. How would this impact me, and what would that mean? So that would be one way to, kind of come up with some preliminary options to bounce off the community. in that, looking at kind of carrying forward those areas where we had stronger consensus in terms of the lot splitting provision, et cetera. And then the other option is, I think this came up in our second meeting over at the sports stable. I think there was a sense, this is a lot of information, we're trying to do a lot of things, and there was a discussion at the end, people wanting to spend time really talking about Original Town specifically. And so one option is that we, before we go any further, we schedule a follow-up community meeting with, that's in Original Town, directly targeted to those folks. Anyone could come, obviously, but really try to get at some of these responses a little bit more and try to figure out where the community wants to go. I think we have a pretty good sense of the community as a whole, but I think that might be a good next step in terms of trying to tease out some of these gray areas that we're still struggling with. So, thoughts?
I think that's probably a really good idea. I'm surprised with kind of the 50-50 split. And because it is a 50-50 split, I don't think you can comfortably, I think that, yeah, more dialogue I think would be really helpful to try and understand maybe what some of those distinctions are, where there are areas of agreement. So yeah, I think we would be a little presumptuous at this point to move forward without engaging residents further, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think with a low number of respondents that we had, it's important that we try to get more of the neighborhood engaged and talk about where they want to go.
You're saying more specifically the Original Town residents? Yeah.
I wasn't able to attend any of the meetings, and I was just wondering, validating, people between Original Town and those outside of Original Town, how is that validated that it was people that truly live in Original Town were answering as Original Town?
It's on the honor system.
Okay.
So we did have a, you could only respond once on your device at home on the online survey, so we had that limitation built in. But in the meetings, we were very aware of kind of participation. So I think it was set up as strongly as we could without doing a scientific survey,
Right.
which we hadn't set out to do.
And I think having Original Town, having a more focused group of Original Town people, I think you could definitely validate that you're getting truthful answers from, and not having people, I'm going to say, infiltrate and change answers based on what they want to see, outsiders wanting to see a different outcome. I just want to make sure that, we're kind of getting valid answers.
So do you have thoughts on, the best venue or way to get people there, in terms of what, I think one of the things I heard pretty clearly is, we proceed with that meeting, which it sounds like we should. It should be a much more informal discussion. I think, because we had so much to cover, there was some frustration of like, there's just, we need some time to pause and just really talk about this. And so, I think that would be our strategy, is to just kind of shift gears a little bit. Most people would be pretty familiar with kind of the basic premise. We could, introduce that in a brief way, but I think just have a lot more dialogue with folks.
From a venue perspective, I would look to the folks we have in the audience, but I think my first thought is just here at Town Hall. I think it's the most convenient for everyone. They can walk over, drive over. It's my initial thought.
Yeah, and it could be a series of meetings too, and it could be in different places. I mean, it could be an official meeting. It could be more of an event where people come and talk.
Could be a
Right,
walking tour or something almost.
Yeah.
You could do kind of a walking tour with staff and planning commission and consultants, with residents from Original Town, maybe just to capture some of their thoughts about, sometimes those character things can come out when you're out there. Like for me, one of the character things I think of is the creek, right? So how does the creek interplay? What, I think there's a lot of things that you could try and dial in on character by being out there in maybe a different way that's not here in a room. Just a thought.
Well, and on the flip side of that, actually figuring out whether these words and these phrases are right, because everybody's struggling with the word character. I struggle with the word character. There are some homes that have been added onto, and they've got some character. There are other homes that are just, I mean, even some that haven't been have been fixed up, or porches have been added that have character. There are others that don't. And it's an opinion, right? There are people who think the junkyard is really cool, and other people who think it's an eyesore, right? And so there are just lots of components to Original Town that the words are really hard to, get your mind around, right? And so, and character, I think, is one of them. And to me, I think it's more about, at least what I've heard from the people I've talked to, that has a lot more to do with scale and size and height. And the Maple Street homes were just a way of presenting that, right? They're just a big maximum sized home you can do, and there are people who are concerned that could be dropped right next door to them. So that's not as much character as it is scale and height and some design stuff and things like that. But I think we do. I'd like to get a larger representation of Original Town residents to come together and talk about it. And if people want to be able to build Maple Street homes all through Original Town, and that's what the community wants, then we leave things alone and we let people do that. On the flip side, if they'd like a little more reasonable size homes and still have views, and the one way to develop character is to put in guidelines and just allow time to do that. And that's what's been happening over in Louisville. And yeah, there's some big homes in there. There's some little homes in there. It seems to, I'm sure there's some people who are upset about, a large home going in next to a small home, but, over time that character starts to build and starts to develop. And I mean, I'd love to see that neighborhood develop into, or just develop its character, over time, and it not just be a huge block of big rectangular homes. But I think we need to see what everybody has to say and what they think. So.
Yeah, we have quite a dilemma here, because I agree that we need a larger representation of people in Original Town. However, the struggle is, how do you get the people that live in Original Town to come out and be a part of these meetings and give input about what they'd like to see? Because it's clear here that everyone received the same information, but it appears that the majority of the responses were from Rock Creek. And, that's, I think that says a lot, which might be that maybe people in Original Town need more direct outreach. So maybe instead of sending emails and online surveys, we need to go door to door and talk to these people and kind of get a feel for what they want directly, so that all this ambiguity that keeps coming up in our planning commission and these discussions, in my opinion, needs to end, because we get a small representation of people from Original Town, and we hear very loud and clear from some of those people that they have specific ideas about what they want to see and what they don't want to have happen. But for me, it's not an appropriate response from that neighborhood and people in that community. And I think we just need to do a better job getting information to them and having them get information to us.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. And I like the idea of direct outreach. And I think multiple opportunities at different venues at different times of day. The timing of this was not great. This is not a good time of year to reach out to people. I mean, there are several people who they're not even in town, and that were in town during the events that we had, that I know are interested in this, but they couldn't be here. And whether they I don't know if they responded, online or not. But yeah, I agree. I think multiple venues, direct outreach, multiple opportunities, different times of day, on the weekends. Just anything we can do to get the neighborhood engaged.
And one observation I would make, I think, when you compare it to the other responses, I think it looks like when you look at the overall percentage of Original Town residents, it is a very small, but I think when we actually look at the actual population, percentage-wise compared to the rest of the town, it's a reasonable response. I think we want to get more because it's a small area, but I think it's not, you know, a no-show, I would say. I think we had there's definitely some interest, but I think it looks really, really tiny when we look at it compared to the community as a whole.
So that's really good information. I think that part of my thinking and my thought process in that is that kind of given the history with some original town residents, they feel like they are neglected and that like they're on an island on their own based on previous experience and, you know, some of the feedback that I've gotten from those residents. And I really think that, you know, with how in depth we're going in this process, and, you know, to the extent of what we're trying to do here, I think that we need a greater representation nonetheless. I think we need to find a way to do that.
Absolutely.
Is there more to the presentation? I mean, I would like to entertain and allow the public to come up and comment on what they've seen and heard, and I don't know whether we have additional discussion prior to that, or just, I'd just like to hear if anybody wants to have if anybody has anything to say.
So the only thing we have left is to kind of come back to those questions, which I think we've answered, but we can confirm that after the public comment.
Yeah, I think that would be a better time to do that as well. So, so yeah, I'd like to take a few minutes if anybody would like to come up and respond to what they've heard and seen, and you know, provide any thoughts. If you could take, you know, the normal 5 minutes, and the lights will come on, and, you know, just let us know what you have to say. Thanks. Frick, Rick's up on me. Oh, hang on, Carl. I think you. Go ahead. I'll get you next.
Commissioner McCool, Commissioner Reese and I just mentioned to each other about what would bring out more residents in the town of Superior, an original town. And it's not specific to original town, but in general, beer and barbecue.
Beer and barbecue. I like it.
And Wayne's came to mind.
Yeah.
There's a large parking lot in
Sure.
front of Wayne's. We, you know, whether it's Clarion or it's the town or whoever, you know, erects a tent and we promote it and say, come out, have some barbecue, and let's talk about what you'd like to see in the town. I think we, you know, beer and barbecue would attract a lot of residents.
I was thinking
anywhere.
Children's Park.
Yeah.
Maybe Children's Park. 'Cause then I think people are really, you know, they're going down. You know.
I don't want it in my
Yeah,
front yard.
Just
It's your side yard, Gladys. Side yard.
Phyllis's yard is off limits.
Anyway, we definitely have venues, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Rick Kupner, 411 West Charles. I've been here almost 70 years. Okay, I've seen a lot of changes. And believe me, I don't like Cold Creek Crossing. I can't see the mountains no more. But it happened. People on the planning commission, they voted for it, some of them. And now we're coming into the infill part of this community. And there's going to be some development go on. That's what life's about. And I think that bringing in the whole community of the original town is really a good idea. Because it is our destiny. It's not Rock Creek's destiny. They've got theirs already. You know, I sit on the board when Rock Creek was annexed in 1986. And you know, we tried to do a good job. And I think we did overall a good job with, you know, there's some things I didn't like go on, but it happened. And when you get big developers like that, they have a tendency to run over the small communities. But I think this last little bit here, what happens over here, I've never come to the podium and said one thing about it, because that's development. Now let's let the original town have its say on where we want to go. And I think that's an excellent, excellent idea. Because, you know, what is Rock Creek, and you people that sit and or live in Rock Creek, basically, I mean, what does it bother them that what goes on here? Nothing. They don't have no skin in the game. I'm a large property owner here. Probably one of the largest ones. And you know, I have people wanting to buy our property every day. But I'm just waiting to see how it's going to play out. So, you know, I'd like to see small houses and maybe the accessory dwelling units, things like that. And I think, you know, if you bring the whole community, well, a lot of people will come out. There's no doubt in my mind. Because I know I can get probably 25 tonight if I go knock on doors and tell them, hey, we're going to have a meeting here, and this is our destiny. Nobody else is gonna tell Original Town what we need or what we want to see. And thanks for considering that. I think it's an excellent deal.
Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Say in a few words, Carl Worthington. We own the house at 307 Coal Creek for about 10 years. I've been in Boulder area for 60 years, started the Boulder Mall and the Boulder Greenbelt in the 60s, and work all over the world on this type of thing, and even helped you with your original town center that didn't get built. It was a nice presentation. I was not able to participate in any of the earlier ones, but I'll just make a couple of comments. On the marketplace, I think that's a huge opportunity there to do what you're beginning to look at doing. And I don't make little ideas, do big ideas, and eventually you'll be successful. So I think that you saw some framework ideas there tonight that could be carried further. One of the most important things that creates a great area is the streetscape. And great towns that have trees all over and on every street, and even in original town, one overlay would be a street tree program so that everyone has it. And that often raises the values no matter what the architecture is, big or small, creates that. And the same in the marketplace. I think once you develop a grid plan for opportunity, but you have also a really nice streetscape plan that will really help carry it. It should be mixed use, not just a little more retail. It should have office, residential, all of those mixed together in a really tight-knit kind of fabric. Original Town, I think there again, that's a discussion point that you're beginning to address in terms of what the consensus is for many of the people in Original Town. Personally, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to, again, create a streetscape, design guidelines, areas in alley which we have off of 2nd Street or Coal Creek, that alley-loaded ADUs, granny units, I think is a very important low-impact kind of addition to the area that gives flexibility for owners that want to do that. The lots are very deep in our block, so you could do that. You'd never know whether it was there or not, on the street. So I think that with continuing with the guidelines, and I think you had some great ideas about having an event or events where you do get more people out, and I think a great idea. Having your barbecue, that might be a way to get people. I think it's also the idea of even having some walk-arounds too, so that everybody can chat as they walk and so on, and then come back and say, okay, what is the good and the bad of restrictions? What do we want to save, and what are we not going to argue about? So I think that you've got a great opportunity, and it should be a pedestrian, walkable, oriented district, especially in the marketplace, because today it's auto-oriented, and it's got to have almost every bit of streets faced with buildings, not parking lots or structures. Or if you do the structures, it ought to be retail or something on the ground level, so you don't know that the parking is there like we did in Boulder. So thank you for letting me say a few words.
Gladys?
Gladys Forshee, 404 South 3rd Avenue. An event is fine. Let's try Asti Park. And I also went to clarify, we are talking about Original Town. We're talking from Marshall Road to the south. We're talking from 5th Avenue to McCaslin. Is that Original Town that we're talking about?
You're saying like not Coal Creek, not
Right.
Sagamore, right? Is that what you're trying to?
That's what I want to get
Yeah,
clarified.
the Fifth Avenue right-of-way, like whatever it is now, to McCaslin, Marshall, yes.
Okay, all right. I can live with that.
We don't know that we can restrict others from coming, but yes, that would be,
No,
that
but
would be the.
No, that's fine, I understand.
That's
an
where the
event,
invitations would go.
would probably be good. As far as walking, what in the goddamn hell are we want to walk it for? We live here. We can discuss it on this by, that corner over there, or, that house up there.
Oh, a walking tour, you mean?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
we're not going to do that.
We probably don't need that, yeah.
All of us original town residents aren't going to do it. I can tell you the ones south of the creek definitely aren't going to do that. This would be good to have an event, and they probably would come, but they're going to want to see that they're actually going to be listened to, and something's actually going to happen from having this get-together. Because how many times have we had meetings and discussed this, and not a damn thing has happened? So if we can see in original town that you're going to do this, whatever it is you agree on doing or whatever, and it's going to make our life better or not disrupt whatever we've been living with for all these years, then you can probably get people out. But there's so much biff-baff going around that, you just don't, well, yeah, planning commission, they talked about this, yeah, well, they've never done anything. So, if we can see that you're going to get something done for us in Original Town, in this nice little area that is Original Town that has been here since 1896, we might be sociable. But otherwise, we're going to be grumpy. Because some of us south of the creek especially are sick and tired of all this crap that's been going on. So, but if you stick to this area that you're telling me about, then I can get some arms twisted to come.
Thank you.
I don't want it in Children's Park in my front door.
George, go ahead.
George Kuffner of 7520 West Cold Creek. Earlier this week I heard, or maybe it was the tail end of last week, that the Supreme Court said that the online people will now be responsible for taxes. So they're trying to even the playing field with the big box stores. So we need to slow this runaway train down to see what that's going to do, because I've been saying since day one, we're going to hit a point, and the Costco people that are coming to Costco to shop are going to say, you know what, I'm tired of sitting in a traffic jam, and I'm not coming no more. And when they quit coming, we're going to lose our golden goose. And then how many of us are going to be able to afford our taxes to live here? So, I mean, yeah, all this building sounds neat and all that, but we have something up there on the corner that we need to be protecting. And all developers can see is a few more dollars, a few more houses. And with them even in the playing field, let's see if it helps. Costco's been in a little bit of a bind, but this may help. I don't think they're in that big a bind anyway, because that store is one busy place on the weekends. I hate to leave town. And I don't, I'm living here. I'm not just coming here to shop, but if we keep putting more people in here, they're pretty soon going to say, I'm not coming. And then we're going to hurt. And then it's too late because they ain't coming back. So we need to be very careful on how we continue down this road of more cars, more people, because they're getting a bunch in and out of there just the way we are. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yep.
Hello, my name is Dalton Vallette. I live on 912 East Carval Place. I watched a video recently about how to make a city beautiful, and it's on YouTube. It's from the School of Life, and I would urge everyone actually to look at it. And they pointed out 6 fundamental principles that planning commissioners and that towns should follow when redesigning and redeveloping an area. And I think there's a lot of potential in the Northwest area to look at some of these principles and make sure that we're following them when creating such a potentially massive project. So number 1, they said, not to be too chaotic or not too organized. You don't want everything to look the exact same, but you don't want everything completely scattered either. You don't want it to seem that there's a massive skyscraper here, and then a vacant lot here, and then a Home Depot there, and then movie theater next to it, and then another skyscraper. That seems random. But if you have just the same office building after office building after office building, then it just becomes boring and repetitive. So we need to find a key balance there between retail, residential, civic space, and make sure we have a good balance and mixture of all three of those. There also needs to be visible life. And I think that's really important here because right now, as we can all probably see in the Northwest area, there's a lot of dead space. There's a lot of parking spaces that are continuously vacant, and I think we can absolutely improve on the area as far as walkability and viewability from a person's perspective, particularly in Center Street. We have that beautiful sculpture of the horses there, but no one ever walks around it and no one appreciates it, I believe, because you're just using it as a roundabout and you're not actually walking around there and enjoying what could be a very nice focal point for that area. And thirdly, what I think is very important with this area is it needs to be compact. Right now, as was mentioned in the presentation earlier, there's a great distance between Whole Foods and the former Sports Authority with Costco and Target and Michael's and that area. So we need to make sure that middle part, that really dead zone, is able to actually have some life thriving in it and is actually accessible to pedestrians walking around. And then fourthly, we need to have orientation but mystery. And I think this is very crucial here because you want to be able to have a large boardwalk, they defined it as a boardwalk in the video, that's easy to get from point A to point B if you're in a rush. And I believe a key focal point there is actually Marshall Road. Bisecting the entire area, we're able to actually see people navigate from McCaslin going into Boulder if need be, but then also have some side streets, have some alleys, have some places where a person can feel almost comfortable getting lost. And in this video, they cited a lot of European cities such as London or Paris, where there are unique alleyways and unique little areas that you can wander around and discover something new and adventurous. And I think we have a real opportunity to do something creative like that and be bold and unique and try to make Superior live up to its namesake. And then fifthly, there is a scale. Big things, if we are building something large and investing a lot of money in it, need to be honored and need to be something that we actually love. We shouldn't develop purely for the sake of development. We need to develop because we believe that it inherits the core values that we in Superior adhere to. And I think it's very important with this project and then with the projects in Original Town, we approach as many individuals as possible, even if it means, as Anthony Stewart mentioned, knocking on door to door and getting as many people engaged and communicating with them as possible to make sure that they're really connecting with them. We saw in the survey results a lot of people dropping off near the end in crucial points around Original Town, where at the beginning there was around 700 respondents, and near the end I believe it was around 200 people responding in Original Town. So that's a 500-person drop-off. We need to make sure that we're actually engaging those other 500 people in conversations. And lastly, make it local. We need to make sure that this area, be it Original Town or be it the Northwest area, has character and uniqueness and actually makes people want to go there and makes it an experience that has been really pushed so far. And I really think we need to drive that point home. We need this to be an experience. The marketplaces are changing. We want to make something unique and different. And I think we have a great potential to do that and make sure that this is actually something Superior would have a lot of value in. And as far as Original Town goes, we absolutely need to have more respondents with Original Town, be more communicative. I'm personally from Rock Creek, so I don't feel I can have as much say on what goes on in Original Town because that's not my backyard, but I absolutely believe we need to hear from everyone else what they want to see going on in their backyard. Thank you.
Any other comments? Cool. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so before we kind of circle back to the questions, I wanted to just remind everyone the schedule that we had set out when we started down this path in April. The original plan, assuming we kind of had all of the direction that we needed, we were right on schedule in terms of having our next round of input in May and June. We're kind of here right now on our Planning Commission update. Right now, we're tentatively scheduled to go to the town board for an update in July. That date has not been set yet. We wanted to kind of get through this meeting and see, where we're going with things. But the overall time frame had us doing another round of input later in August. That was based on the assumption that we had clear direction in all areas. And so this is where I think we have some ideas about, we may need to split off here a little bit in terms of how we move forward. The overall goal when we had our discussions with the town board were to try to wrap up this step of the process in terms of clarifying what those implementation strategies might be, what our preferred directions were, by the end of September into early October. And so what I want to do is shift to kind of the things that we've talked about tonight, what we've laid out, and then maybe we can kind of circle back on this question of schedule and see what you guys think. I think we've gotten confirmation on, a lot of the initial ideas. So we talked about the marketplace. Cheney laid out some of those parameters there. It sounds like you guys are comfortable with that. So we'll put together a preferred scenario. We'll have a couple different transportation scenarios. We'll work with LSC to get that modeling done so we have more information to share. One of our questions is, do you want us to schedule a follow-up meeting with you guys in a month or so when we have that information before we go back to the town board? Would you like us to go to the town board in the meantime? What we're trying to be cognizant of is, try to move forward as efficiently as we can where we do have clear direction, but we want to make sure we're kind of getting all of our checks and balances in the mix as well.
Do you want us to discuss that now?
Please.
And do it? Okay.
I think my initial thought on that is I want to be sensitive to the budget that we have, recognizing that we might need some additional output, outreach to Original Town. If we're balancing budget, I personally am comfortable with the feedback we've received from the public and, these concepts. I don't feel like we absolutely have to see it. That's just my opinion, because I'd rather focus budget on Original Town.
Yes, I would support that as well. I think that based on kind of where we are now, what we've been talking about and the refinements that are being made, I'm comfortable with sticking to the schedule as is.
Okay.
And don't feel like I need to have an update on that.
Okay.
I'd like to see what you're going to present to the town board before you present it to the town board. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a meeting like this. It could be in an email form. Okay. Being budget sensitive, but I'd like to know what you're going to present to them exactly before you present it to them.
Okay. Can we provide comment via email, though? Is that something we're able to do if we want to tweak?
Yeah, I think you can provide comment. I mean, I think that discussion is what is limited. So you could provide individual feedback to, everyone could see it, but you wouldn't discuss the feedback. Everybody would just provide it individually. That's a better question for our attorney, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
Actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there were two potential dates we were looking at. One was later in July and one was in August. And I think likely...
That's correct,
That's correct. So I think what we'd be looking for is probably trying to hit that August date, knowing we'd need to back up a couple weeks, give you guys a chance to look at that and make any refinements. So.
Actually, that answer to what I was going to ask is what are we looking at as far as timeline? I don't want to keep pushing things out, and so I agree that what you guys are.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm much less concerned about pushing things out than doing this right. We need to do this right, and it needs to be done right. And if we got to go back and talk budget, then we'll go back and talk budget. This needs to be done right, and it needs to be thoughtful. I think there have been some questions that have been asked about, what it takes to support an area like this. So I would like to have a chance to discuss what comes back before it goes to the board. And I'd prefer to do it at a meeting. That's just because that's how I like to work. But, you know, if we need to provide comment via email, I could probably live with that. But, you know, I'd love to know some answers to the questions I asked about, you know, the number of residents it takes to maybe support some of the ideas that we're thinking about. You know, from the marketplace perspective, from the original town discussions, it's going to take longer. We need the time to do that part right. But with regards to the marketplace, I'd like to at least see it and talk a little bit more. I appreciate what George is saying. I mean, it's, you know, we have experts that we've hired to look at the marketplace and make sure we don't, you know, take off Target and Costco and in these design elements. But I'd like to have more discussion around that, and make sure we understand that and are thoughtful about that. None of this, of course, means we're going to go do anything, because there are just so many players involved that it's going to take additional work to even start to move forward. But it would be good to make sure we're on just taking the right steps and being thoughtful about it. And if time and budget needs to change, then we need to go to the board and talk to them about time and budget. The reasons for this being pushed are, in my opinion, it's more important that we do this right, not try to meet a deadline of November. If we can, great, but if we can't, let's make sure we do this right. Those are
Well,
my
I think
thoughts.
from our perspective at this point, we're on track with the marketplace to, you know, do what we set out to do. I think that the goal is to kind of keep that moving and, you know, try to achieve that based on the direction that we have. So I don't think it's you know, we're certainly far from being at that point of worrying about those things yet.
Okay.
So I think it's more just wanting to make sure you guys feel like you know, had a chance to kind of get familiar with what's going to the board and get your questions answered. So we've heard a lot of different perspectives, though. So can we try to? It sounds like you know, a number of you are comfortable with you know, getting a copy of it, having a chance to, you know, fire back any questions or comments to us, and we refine it, take it to the board. Chair would like to have a meeting. How do we? What's the preference?
Do we have time to have a meeting if this is in August?
One of the
I
questions
don't think it's a long meeting. I mean, it could be combined with another element. I think it's probably an hour at the most discussion.
To get the feedback. Yeah, I mean,
Especially if we
my
get it-
first question, I guess, is how long will it take to do the marketplace scenario refinements and then answer some of the questions that were posed tonight? Would you need 4 weeks, or would you need 2 weeks or 6 weeks, or when would we be able to schedule?
4 is probably the minimum, don't you think, Jane? In terms of, I mean, you need some time to.
Well, I was thinking, it might be most efficient if I sketch.
Janie, could I ask you to come up to the microphone? Thank you, just so we can.
So, like we did when we first started the project, I brought just some scratches, some sketches. Before I go too far down the road, I would appreciate your feedback as well. So what I could do is just really quickly take the feedback and kind of sketch something out, and then we could kind of roll up our sleeves together and have a session about the refinements that we're thinking about. And that could be sooner than 4 weeks, numbers wise, and kind of looking at the case studies.
I think that's probably the least time intensive.
Have you just come up to the
Okay.
microphone?
That's probably the least time intensive, a couple weeks or so to turn those around. We're pretty close to a draft of our findings anyways, so.
What
that's
about
fine.
the
I think-
traffic modeling?
I think the traffic modeling is probably the biggest driver of that question.
Okay.
And, you know, we're also dealing with vacations. We have potentially 2 new members that'll be appointed to the commission in the next few weeks, possibly. We don't know for sure. I think there needs to be a little flexibility to get them up to speed if that does happen. So, I mean, could we pull off something towards the end of July, early August?
Yeah, right now the second meeting in July is open. So we could do, I think that's the 17th, yeah.
And I don't know that I'll be here, but.
Well, we could also look at, early August or so. But we can coordinate that, and we have a meeting next week, so I can circle back with the team and then tell you guys some potential dates at next Tuesday's meeting.
The
We
big
can go
factor
from
is
there.
going to be, we need to work through the initial sketches. Cheney needs to model everything, update the numbers, and we need to run that through the traffic model, and I expect they're gonna need at least 2 weeks.
Okay.
To do that.
Okay.
But we let them know it was coming, but that was, we haven't kind of touched base on that since
Okay.
before the community meeting, so.
And the only other thought I had is that, I mean, we still have and so Clarion's eventually going to come back and give the board an update, but, you know, planning commission can also go to any board meeting and kind of get, you know, them some update, you know, that we had planned to have an update for you, and we're finding these things, you know, the results of the study, you know, give a really preliminary type of update in the next couple of weeks, just to know, just so the town board knows where we're at. I mean, hopefully they're watching, or some of them are watching the meetings, but know where we're at, and that we may be a little bit delayed on, you know, having this all wrapped up by early September or something like that.
Well, especially with the original town designer.
Correct,
So,
yeah. Or, I mean, and that's the other part of the, you know, I mean, we might have a recommendation for the marketplace by September if that's
Sure.
how they want to do it, and we could, you know, kind of split these two and, you know, move full steam ahead with the marketplace, and then, you know, step back a little bit for original town. And I don't know, like, you made some comments about the timing of these meetings, and I don't know, you know, what the or, you know, the vacation schedules of the original town residents are.
No,
Whether or not
yeah.
it's better
Summer's a hard
better
time.
summer,
Summer's
or
a hard
if-
time to do
if
this
we,
kind of
if we
work.
wait
Yeah,
until early
it's-
fall, if
yeah.
we're going to be. But I also thought that what I'd like to know is, I don't know if we have the data or not, but the meeting we held here in October was the best attended meeting we
Right.
had, and
Yeah.
it seemed
Yeah.
like just this location, I think, made it a lot easier for people to get over here, and the other, you know, the sports table was actually quite loud too. So I
Yeah.
apologize. But yeah, we didn't know that going in, how loud that would be. So, but I mean, so we'll see. But we could look into all of those things, and I think that's kind of what Clarion's hoping for, some feedback tonight is, you know, do we want to go forward? Do we feel like we should try to at least get the board the recommendation that they thought they'd have on the marketplace by September, or do you, and split these two, or how do you want to do it?
Well, yeah, we've got several things on the table. So, one, would you guys indulge me and have a meeting, if we can pull it off, and just have a discussion about this?
I'm happy to meet. My concern comes in with budget, because I know the board, there were a number of folks on the board that were hesitant to even approve this contract at all. So my primary concern, if the schedule works, that's great. I don't care about slowing it down. I just really want to be sensitive to the board's pressure on budget.
Okay. How are we on budget if we want to pull that off? Are we?
We'll look at it.
Look
At
at
this point, you know, I think doing an hour meeting is going to be fine.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Just as long as we're not spinning our wheels, I'm kind of concerned about that. I mean, if we are going to do that, I would like to see us moving forward and not just kind of standing still and coming to a halt while we get the refinements that we need.
Well, I think the purpose of that meeting, if we decide to do that, would be to review the consolidated scenarios, review the results of the traffic study. And basically, I think at that point, you know, you guys might have opinions about, you know, are there things that we want to take off the table in terms of the scenarios, or things that you're concerned about that you want to share with the board in terms of, we like the direction where this is going, but, you know,
Yep.
we have concerns about, you know, the potential impacts of X, Y, or Z. So I think it's you know, my opinion would be that'd be a much more advanced discussion than what we're having, because we're starting to get into specific.
And if we can get this via email ahead of time, absolutely. I mean, to give us an opportunity to keep that meeting shorter, I think that's appropriate. But I agree with you. I think being able to just bounce this off of each other and make sure we're all in agreement. I just get nervous about email comments and
It's safer
not being
to-
able to have a
yeah.
discussion. So.
Okay, we'll try to, so we'll try to back into a schedule for the marketplace, assume we'll have a short conversation with you guys just to check in on that in terms of our next steps. Once we check in with LSC and work with Stephen to try to look at schedules. The question in terms of the original town, I think, you know, we have clear direction. We need to do some additional outreach. The question on that is timing. One option I could see while this is fresh in everyone's mind is, while Cheney is focused on moving the marketplace stuff forward, we could absolutely try to schedule those meetings in July if you don't think it's a barrier, you know, in terms of it being summer and that sort of thing. We're happy to do that to keep that moving.
we think about that for a minute? Maybe go back to Cheney's question about, you wanted some feedback on tonight? You wanted some feedback from us on this drawing, or you were
No.
mentioning something earlier about wanting feedback?
I think in that first meeting with you all, and I was saying what I could keep it just sketchy and loose, and that we could get feedback sooner. But the more I
Okay.
think about it, I think the direction to be most efficient is to look at numbers, do some case studies, and figure out what are some general, housing units, office square footage, or addition of retail that we think we could look at.
Okay.
And then have the traffic modeling occur with the 2 grids that we've laid out, the quasi redirecting Marshall versus a more pedestrian friendly Marshall. And then that feedback will direct what I sketch. So I think that's the order that we need to focus on. So maybe I would say a month at least. We need to talk to the traffic engineers to see what their timeline is.
Yeah, so I guess the question that, to me, it seems like we need time on the marketplace to provide the information that you need. And what I'm hearing from the Planning Commission is you'd like to see that data before you make a formal recommendation to the board. So before this goes back to the board, we need 4 weeks before to get to Planning Commission. So one of the questions I guess it comes down to is, in that 4 weeks, do we want to start with try to schedule something more of a community meeting to keep the original town discussion going and on the same kind of path and time frame as the marketplace? But that,
I'm okay with starting it. I'm not sure I could want to commit to finishing it. And
Right.
if we want to
Okay.
try to do an engagement or two, that might be fine.
Okay.
I think summer needs to get passed, and I think school needs to get started, and I think you're going to get more engagement. I think that's why October was so awesome. I think summer is a bad time to try to get people to come together and do this. They're busy. My goodness, just between baseball alone, I barely have time to do anything else, getting my one kid around. So I think summer's a really bad time to engage with people. That's my thought, but I don't mind starting it with the expectation that we'd want to continue it after school starts and get another meeting or two. But that's my thought. I just feel like it's a bad time to.
yeah, and I guess I'm trying to balance that with Commissioner Ritchie's concern that of the budget. So if we were to start it and we just end up spinning our wheels for 2 or 3 months, where we could.
Tell you what, I don't know if I can get on the agenda or if I've got to do it in public comment. Let me go talk to the board about this. I am passionate about not letting this get pushed just for the sake of it getting pushed and for budget. I am really want to make sure this gets done well, and I really want to make sure we can engage everybody. So
everybody does.
I'm happy to go talk to the board and just from a timing standpoint, because I know there are some commissioners who are concerned about time. Yes, there were a couple of commissioners who were concerned about budget. We are well into this process. We have a lot of great information. We have a lot of great public comment. I think they need to listen to that and hear it and just give us a little bit of time. I don't think we're asking
I think an
for
update
months, but
from Planning Commission to the board
Yeah.
might be a good idea,
Okay.
and then we'll have that direction, hopefully by early July or
yeah.
mid-July.
Did you have something else? Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah, keep thinking. That's all right.
So just to clarify then, it sounds like you all are comfortable with us proceeding to try to get some additional engagement with original town folks started in July. And we'll see what happens. I mean, we may be surprised. I think it would be a mistake, for us to wait too long, because I do get concerned about losing momentum. We had that
Sure.
stall, and so I'd like to keep the conversation going while it's fresh in everyone's mind. And, I think there's always, the ability to circle back on that. But we may be surprised, and we may get what we need out of, less than we think we need. So I think we should start down that path if you're comfortable
I'm gone the
with that.
first 2 weeks in July, so the latter part of July would be.
Okay.
I'd appreciate it if we could keep that.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear, I think, what Clarion's perspective is regarding that. And I think, I'm speaking for myself. I don't know if I'm speaking for the other commissioners, but if it needs commissioners pair up. I know we can't be more than, 2 together, but maybe we do some outreach paired up, and try and do some door-to-door stuff so that we're not blowing through budget to have you guys do that, but we think through maybe prepared questions. I think there might be some ways that we could be efficient and keep the momentum, respecting budget.
And engaging us, which is one thing I want to do.
Yeah.
We've not, we've sat at meetings and we've talked about this, but I would like us to be engaged with the people in Original Town.
And two, I think, Ms. Forshey's point, you all know Original Town inside and out. You all live there. You don't need to walk it, but I think it would benefit the commissioners. At least I know for me personally. I don't get off Coal Creek Drive very often, so I think it also helps us just reinforce, ideas and thoughts about kind of what we're seeing too. So.
And kind of a joint comment or multiple comments. I think that utilizing many of the residents from Original Town who attend these meetings and have you as champions of a cause and arm twisters, going to your neighbors, and once a date is set, that we rely on you to kind of go out and be a champion of the cause and state that you believe. You've been attending these meetings, that this commission has every intent, and we're putting forward a lot of effort to review all of this, and the more input that we can get from Original Town members gives us the strength and the the ability to push this forward. And we want to have as much input from Original Town as possible. So if you could be champions of the cause and really get out and assist us in getting a higher turnout, that would be very beneficial.
And we need to be prepared to educate and listen to the residents, because people are going to come out that haven't seen a lot of these ideas and don't even have an idea of what zoning is and what can happen and what can't. So it's got to be a combination, just as it's been in all the events, of education and discussion, which is going to require your involvement, of course. So.
Well, and I think, the heavy lifting on kind of getting all that information pulled together has been done. So to me, this is a stepping back. It's a more informal conversation. It takes a lot less work, frankly, to just have those conversations. And so, that doesn't scare me in terms of time commitment. I think we've got a lot of stuff that's been done, a lot of information that we can build on. So it's just that, having those conversations. One thing I would suggest is maybe we can put down some ideas of just a few different options, and we may, it may be that there's some stuff that you guys do, and we have, 1 or 2 meetings, things that people could do on their own. So we'll just try to lay out some simple options that could be, pretty efficiently executed to try to capture, a range of folks in this area. So does that work, Stephen?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm wondering on that, maybe without Clarion here, but if we have a meeting next week, so maybe we could discuss those options next week, if we could maybe, just an idea to keep that part moving quicker.
Yep.
We could discuss after that a regular agenda item.
We can lay out some
staff.
tentative timelines and some different methods, ways to do that. And yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to get that feedback, so.
Yeah, because we come up with some different reach out ideas, whether it's like the first Friday type meetings at the coffee shop versus barbecue and beer, and a morning thing at Panera. It just give people lots of options to reach out to us. And I assume if we post the meeting, more than 3 of us can be there, right? So as long as it's posted,
correct. Yep.
Right? And we don't have to record it or take minutes or anything. We can just have a.
Phyllis has to be there and take minutes, With
your earphones, bring that whole thing up.
Even on the walking tour.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The iPhone. Okay. That sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for indulging me on that. So.
All right. Well, I think we have what we need for now. We weren't sure we could get through this in 2 hours, but
did it
right on the money. So appreciate all the time and input, and we will circle back soon.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
We have any staff announcements before we?
just we have a meeting next week.
Tuesday.
We'll be discussing the Anderson property off of 88th and US 36. So it's the southeast corner, just south of the town center. So it's going to be a pretty,
Is this a
significant discussion. in
PD?
terms of-
So what is
It's
what
a
is it? Is it a
rezoning, plat, and then a development application for 31 duplex units on 62 lots. So it's 32 or 31 buildings, but 62 units. So in that area. So
This is the property adjacent to Autry Lake? Or Lake? It's the other side of other side of 88.
other side of 88th from Hodgkins Harris. Is that what you're talking about?
Hodgkins Harris,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
the other side.
Yeah.
What's that?
So
Has there been a concept plan presented, or no?
they did not come forward with the
Okay,
concept plan.
so they're just coming forward with a
with development.
rezone and plat request and,
Yeah.
okay,
So, but I'll have that report out to you hopefully on Friday.
okay,
I'll be
Sounds
doing that
good.
the rest of the week.
all right. Anybody have anything else? Nope, okay,
Thank you.
we're adjourned.
When's the next board meeting where the PC appointments will be on?